Everybody. So this particular drawing is really an extension of our previous drawing where we worked on the sphere. And eggs are, very similar. They're rounded. Um, they have a round shape, but they also are a little bit different in the sense that they have kind of like a pointed sort of, look to them, which is interesting because it's something that if you get right, we really recognize it as, oh yeah, that's what an egg looks like. And if it's a little bit off, like if your, egg is a little too pointy, typically, then we start seeing it, as being not quite right. So they're very interesting because, they're sort of a universe, in a way, universal type of shape that we recognize. But really, they are very similar to the sphere. It's the same, pretty much the same technique of working with the value scale and also working with blending and observation and really trying to, just kind of create good transitions between your values. The thing that we're doing that's different is that we're working with charcoal, which I feel that people usually have a very definite opinion on whether they like it or whether they really don't like it. Typically, a lot of times what people don't like is the same thing that people do like, which is that, it's very sort of fluid and sort of slippery and kind of like powdery and you can really blend, but that also makes it, a little bit messier, which, can be frustrating. And sometimes it feels like it's almost like paint, where it sometimes feels like it can be a little bit out of control because you put a little bit down and there's so much happening. um, it kind of can really just it's very liquid. I would just say, when you're working with it, sometimes some techniques is to put a piece of paper down onto your drawing. This is what I do when I work with messy media like charcoal, is I, even soft pencils, like when you get to really soft pencils, I'll put a piece of paper down where my hand goes on the drawing underneath it. That way I'm not sort of going over that with my hand. I find it one way to make it, cleaner. Um, hmm, I think that's all I wanted to say here. Other than really the same thing that I mentioned in the sphere drawing, which is that if you can draw an egg, and shade it, again, you can do anything. It's like there's the same, it seems like, oh, it would be so much harder to do more complex things. It all it is, it just requires more attention to the complexities, like when you do something like a face or something, that has more moving parts in it. But really, it's exactly the same. So all the things you're learning here, observing and, looking at the egg and really examining where the lights and darks fall, that's exactly the same thing that you do in any type of drawing. So again, it's like you learn this and you really have learned almost everything. Well, not quite, but you get the idea that it isn't much harder than this. Um, it just might take you a little bit more time or a little bit more attention. Okay, let's get started. Brody, okay, good. Yes, you've got your arrangement here and your value study. I think that's off to a good start. Um, and so that looks good. What I would say is that what you want to work on a little bit more is blending. If you look here, I'm just going to kind of zoom in a little bit closely. You see you've got kind of white and black kind of areas all kind of just right against each other. You want to blend that so it becomes more of a value study. Same thing with your all of your shades in here. They're kind of like, you want to get more of a gray tone in there, and when you work with charcoal, you just want to really blend it. Really, really blend it so it smooths out and you get maybe a wider range here. Um, I also wonder too if it has something to do with your scan or your photograph, like it seems maybe a little high contrast. It's a little hard to say. When by high contrast, I mean that it's sort of, um, I don't see any gray tones. I just see basically black and white in here. And sometimes, if your camera is set on to be high contrast, it can really like eliminate some of the, the kind of the subtle val, like, okay, let me just show you here what I mean. Some of these kind of more subtle in-between tones. You want to aim for those, right? So I would just keep working on this. You want to make sure too that you tone the entire page um, as the assignment instructions ask you to do. So just keep blending, keep toning. Something to keep in mind too is when you're drawing, it I think this is a drawing that, you could keep the setup of, but you could start a new page. Um, you know, make your eggs a little bit bigger. This is actually a really good example of how big they could be, because you'll find that the larger the eggs are, the easier it is to blend them. Okay, so I think your light source looks really good too. I can tell that there's a good strong light source here. I would just keep working on this. Something else too, if you have like a still life that's sort of set up this way, like horizontal, putting the page this way on a horizontal as well can give you more space. Okay, so I keep working on those points here. And also, if you can, and this is not so important, presentation, but if you can, just submit it as a JPEG rather than a PDF. PDFs are a great file format. Just for this class, the requirement is for them to be a JPEG. Again, that's not really a big point, and if you somehow don't have the ability to do that, I'd work a little bit more on the photography aspect, like I mentioned before, just double checking your grayscales. That's more important on a technical end. And if you need any help with that, you can feel free to drop me a note, and we can sort of try to figure out why that might be happening, if that's happening. Now, if you look at this particular file and you think that looks exactly like my drawing, and you feel like it's a very accurate representation of it, then I would just say keep working on adding more values, keep blending, and all of the eggs as well as the bowl and the background. Just kind of keep looking at your scene and coming back and adding and subtracting your values. Hi, Tyrone. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed this. People often love drawing eggs, and some people, it's like charcoal. They don't like it at all. It just depends on, your I don't know, your what you like to draw or what you find satisfying. And um, anyhow, yeah, I think overall this looks really good. I think you've got a really good, you know, understanding of the process. You've got a really good light source and arrangement, as well as the composition itself, where you've placed the bowl and the eggs. So I would just say, just keep working on this a little bit more, refining it. Keep working on sort of maybe adding more. You want to tone the entire page, so just go in and you can kind of, lightly work on these, sort of blending a little bit more. Uh, right in here, it looks like you went in and kind of took some of the charcoal out, which is great with your eraser. You just want to try to avoid leaving like that kind of border there. You want to just kind of keep blending here, so you get it's going to be dramatic, but you're going to get a little bit of a smoother transition. And yeah, I think that's the main thing here. Just kind of keep working just a tiny bit more on that. Um, let's see, looking here. Whoops. Maybe kind of working a little bit more on this, curve right here. Uh, and then maybe just this area in here. That's always, there's a lot happening in that edge, isn't there, where you get the reflection upwards. I don't know if our example here it has a very, it's sort of lighter here, but there's a very small reflection. But you can see, you've got like the shadow then meets this reflection, and then it immediately gets a little darker. So it again, it's you have to be quite careful in there. So yeah, just keep working, keep working on all the areas, refining it just a little bit more. Courtney, okay, yeah, this looks really nice. You've got some really, I like the shadows in here, how they have a sense of transparency, which is what you want. And I think your eggs also got captured all of the different parts of it. That looks really good in terms of like the reflected shadow, and then this kind of middle area and how it lightens up, with the light source. Yeah, overall, I think this looks really good. And I only have just some very, and yes, charcoal's great. You actually mentioned the benefits and the disadvantages, of it being great to blend, but also kind of messy and hard to control. So I would say the only thing I would work on a wee bit more is there are places here where you have some, like a little bit of outlining in here, and you want to just remove that outlining and replace it with value. So sometimes when you're working, you start with the outline, and sometimes you have to come back in and remove it. And so if you look at like this egg, right, you can see that there's no outline. What it actually is where you do see an outline, and you probably know this already, but it's this value shape, the shape against the darker shape below. That's what creates this outline, not an actual outline that exists there. And in some places you will find you may not even see an outline, like depending on, let's see if there's any in here. There's a little bit of, let's see if I can find, that's pretty dramatic. I think this one we looked at is the closest, but you may not actually see much of a outline at all in certain places. Like right here is probably the closest, where the background and the egg are so close that we sort of get more of an implied outline there because of this trend, because of um, the contrast between the values of the background and the egg right here. So our eye just naturally sort of continues over there. You know, it's there, but it's very subtle. So if that happens, don't worry, just don't even, you don't even, in parts, you may not have much of a definition, and that's perfectly okay. What sometimes people do is they might artificially kind of darken the background a little bit more to kind of bring that in. And that's sort of, our freedom, creative freedom as a drawer. Um, yeah, so that's all I'd really work on here a little bit more, maybe. Yeah, just sort of see where you might blend a little bit more. Some of the transitions maybe are a bit abrupt, like right here, maybe a bit here. Whereas all of the transitions in here look pretty smooth, like these in the interior of the egg. Okay, yeah, so good job overall. Janelle, so I just brought yours into Photoshop so I could really I did an autocorrect on it just so that we could see the shading a little bit more clearly. Yeah, so I think you've got a good start here. To me, it looks like you've got like both white and black represented here. And what you want to do is you want to work a little bit more on the midtones. That's why having that value study is so important, because it reminds you, oh yeah, I need to have, those gray tones, those middle tones in there. And generally speaking, most of you, or a lot of your drawing, I would say the majority of your drawing is always going to be in the gray toned, and only maybe a small amount is going to be like the highlight here is going to be white, and the darkest shadows are going to start to be black. So I just keep going through here and just really analyzing what's happening in your drawing, and try to avoid going too fast, even though you can go pretty fast in charcoal, but you want to kind of be sort of soft enough and sort of slow enough that you can notice, you know, because it looks like you filled in the background really quickly, and sometimes that can look, sometimes that looks great, and sometimes you might need a little bit more, to slow down. And same thing, you want to kind of work at eliminating all of these lines in here. You want to replace those with values, just like I mentioned to Courtney before. That's so important here to get that sense of realism that they're going after. I would probably recommend you just start over with this drawing because, working with charcoal, it's even can be even harder with than pencil. Like once you get the darks in, to remove them. And so start with your vine charcoal. Generally speaking, that's a good place to start because that's very much more smoothable. And then as you get more confident about where your blacks are going to be, your darks, start putting that compressed charcoal in, because that's going to be more solid and harder to move. Although it's not impossible. It's pretty movable, but there's parts in your paper that you'll notice that it tends to stick to. Okay, so I would just keep working on this. Let's see. You like the compressed charcoal sticks better than the vine. Yeah, yeah, the vine is good because it's so, in a way, it's the most impermanent thing. Like you put it on and you can blow it and the whole thing seems to disappear. Yeah, so, and a lot of times, we use the compressed charcoal just as that kind of first sketch, where we're not quite sure where everything goes. So it's not something you really need to necessarily use much more than that first original kind of quick study. And then you can just go right in, if you like, and you feel confident, you can just go right into your um, compressed charcoal. And let's see if you mentioned anything else here. Difficult to not create outlines. Yeah, that's right. I know it is. It's hard. Um, okay, so thank you for including the photograph. That's great. And let's find out where you are here. There we are. Okay, yeah. Oh, nice shadow. I think that's starting to look really good. And so, since I have this here, So what I would say for yours is to keep working on the blending part. Also just kind of really, sort of working with the shape itself, really trying to get that down. And then also moving away. And how do you move away from outline? You replace it with value. Sometimes you have to remove the outline and you have to kind of, add value. You can oftentimes you can leave the outline in until the very end and then start removing it. But I would keep working on that, like just kind of blending stuff softly, really trying to get the different, like if we look at, let's look at this egg right here. Let me see if I can put them upside, well, I'm not going to put them up side by side. I think it'll make it too small. So in this one, you can sort of see here how there's like a few different values as we go to the highlight. There's a lot of highlight in it, but it starts with kind of a light to medium tone, and then we gradually move over to the white. And so you want to kind of sort of get that happening a little bit more here, that transition, and watch making like those kind of long lines happening on your egg, because that'll flatten it. If you can, it's good to, even though there's different examples for how to do this, I think that the most satisfying is when you kind of reduce the amount of lines. Like by lines, I mean like the kind of back and forth shading, to smooth it out, because you will notice you'll get more of a realistic look when you do that. You know, our example here, I think at the end, we look at it, let's see, it's somewhere near the end. It's a lot more kind of loose, which it has its own beauty, but it's not necessarily as realistic as this one down here, because the line marks are so strong. So you might want to aim a little bit more towards that, because you'll get more realism. And I would just keep experimenting. I might even try taking another piece of paper, taking your vine charcoal, really working on getting those shapes in correctly, and then starting your shading again. Just keep experimenting with it. It takes a while, especially if you're starting with a new medium like charcoal, to really get a handle of it on it. So if it doesn't, quite gel the first time, then, it's just consider it an experiment, and just start a new one. Okay, not the biggest fan. Yeah, yeah, I know. The people are just, yeah, I have sort of a love-hate relationship with charcoal. It can be really great, but yeah. Okay, yeah, I think you've done some really nice areas in here. Like this area in here is really lovely. We can really sort of see the transparency of the shadow and the way it starts darker here and it kind of goes towards the lighter area, which is oftentimes what shadows do. You've worked, I think, really nicely with the whole value scale, so it's kind of giving that diffuse look, which is so important. And also, I think you've done a nice job here at eliminating the outlines, which is a really key part of creating realism. So I would just say, let's see, a couple things. Teacup. Oh, I see. So, okay, this is the handle. I would work a little bit maybe more on here, clarifying that handle. I would have a little trouble figuring it out. So you might want to look back at that teacup and see if there's anything you could add in here that would clarify it. Um, just refine any, just kind of keep refining it, seeing if there's anything else you can add in there. Um, So the light's coming from here. It almost seems like there should also be a shadow here as well. Maybe not. Um, and then just toning the entire page. You want to just make sure, even if it's just, um, a small amount, or, alternately, if you don't want to tone the whole page, you could cut the page down. I'd be almost inclined to do that, just because that way you won't have so much like negative space around it. Like just take it off of your notepad, just kind of trim it down, and then, or even do that in Photoshop after. You can kind of crop it, so, and then just sort of tone the background wherever it is. Yeah, okay, I think this is looking really good, and yeah, I would just keep, and then there's also, I've noticed there's a little bit of a point here on this egg, which is making it look a little bit like not quite like an egg, so you might want to clean that up a little bit. Um, okay, okay, Kiara, yes, this is definitely, every time we start something new, it gets a little bit more challenging, and but I think it's all about really trying to just make sure you have enough time and really watching those instructional videos, which we're so lucky to have. So I would say in yours, it looks like you've got to start here to your value scale. You want to just make sure you've got a few more in that range here. You've got two, maybe five or six or even more, from light to dark, and then start bringing those into your drawing. First of all, start when you sketch. Start with your vine charcoal, sketch in your bowl and your eggs, because it looks like maybe the back of your bowl is missing here. Start with that. Really feel confident about where you situated things. Then make sure you've got your light source wherever you do it, the left or the right, typically, and then start filling those values in. So you're going to be starting to replace the outlines with value, right? Just like we talked about before with this one, so you're starting to just, you can start with your mid-tones, leaving the white of your paper, slowly add your darks, working back and forth. Again, check out that instructional video. It's really, I think, very, very useful for this assignment to just get your, to see how you want to start working with it. Make sure you're toning all of your page and just keep working with it.